The enjoyment I get out of gliding is doing something, or perceived to be doing something different from the norm. It's also the science of the flying, the serenity once you're up there, looking down, a different perspective altogether. You're working the lift, trying to work out where the lift is, the downdrafts, the updrafts, using nature to maintain flight. I read in a newspaper article back in the late 1980s that there was a new gliding club being formed in the South Wairarapa. Apparently this was a result of a split between the power pilots and the glider pilots of the Wairarapa and Ruahine Aero Club, based up in Hood Aerodrome in Masterton. There was a contact phone number there. I duly contacted the person and was invited to have a look at the new airstrip that was being formed. Gave a handout, found out the time, date and venue, duly fronted up. There were 32 people at that meeting, all prospective members. There were a number of very experienced gliding people there. Also, the CFI for the Air Training Corps Masterton, he was also there and spoke on gliding as a sport is very safe. At that time, the Air Training Corps were being launched by a winch. So the question was asked, well, why can't we do that? Fortunately, Chief Flying Instructor, who was based with the Air Training Corps, also became our Chief Flying Instructor at Jury Hill Gliding Club. Winch launching was really quite something. The early days of winching, of course, was a lot of trial and error. Most of us were learning on how to do it and didn't really have much idea. But however, we got it sorted, and I must admit we got very good at it because we tried all sorts of ways of doing things. The first winch we used was the Air Training Corps winch. That was a 6-cylinder Valiant Hemi engine. The ATC in Masterton got away from the flying aspect. In fact, they had sold their K7, which was glider Delta Tango, and of course the winch was just left there doing nothing. Jim Bicknell negotiated to purchase that, and Julie did, and now we've got it back in storage.
The operation with the ATC was with a moderately powered winch. It really wasn't powerful enough, but it could get the glider up to 11 or 1200 feet. I had agreed to do 3 flights with them, and after the first one I was in a slight state of shock because the takeoff was very much like a pilot would experience with a steam catapult off an aircraft carrier. You were thrown back into the seat and surged forward and then up into the air, and that was really invigorating. Had I not agreed to take a number, that first one would have been the last one. And I find that a lot of people have the same reaction today. It's an adrenaline rush, and it's really amazing how quickly you leave a little pasture and the next moment you're really looking out over most of the Wairarapa or wherever you happen to be flying from. The setup at the Wairarapa and Ruahine Aero Club was that they were largely pioneers in the gliding movement too. And a number of those early pilots, while they did have power flying experience, were also very interested in gliders because gliders could utilise the wave conditions that are prevalent here. Douglas Yarrell still holds the gain of height record for New Zealand, and that was set here just a few miles away in the Tauruas. That was an epic flight, and it just showed the adventurous spirit that a lot of those people had. They were exploring something that to them was quite unique. That was the start of the development of our gliding club here. We called a public meeting. I think we had about 30 or 40 people attend. The meeting was held in Greytown. We had to get permission to establish a gliding club, and that took a year to process. There's a movement known as Gliding New Zealand, which holds a charter from civil aviation. So we had to work through parts of that charter to be recognised as an affiliate member of Gliding New Zealand. And there was quite a lot of paperwork. Quite a few of the Gliding New Zealand officials came and visited the site and had a good look at it. In the process, the Wairarapa and Ruahine section of gliding was dying, and that was a little bit painful to see, but that just developed, or stayed, should I say, as a power flying club, and the gliding operations shifted to this site.
Jim Bicknell, who was flying up there with the glider pilots at that time, has a dairy farm down in the Papawai area, which is just east of Greytown. Suggested, well, yes, he could use the farm. The ground would have to be levelled, fences taken out, and runways built and put in there.
Well, I've more or less retired from farming now. It was possible to run a dairy farm and have a gliding strip on it. Some people thought it wouldn't work. So this area is alluvial flat, so there were one or two old river channels through it that we had to sort out. We had to shift one or two trees. That gave us a bit over 3,000 feet of runway, which was sufficient for a winch launch. There was a river channel just to the north of the hangar site, and that was filled in and levelled off, and that gave us close on 5,000 feet of runway. I think if you wanted to set up an airfield anywhere in the country now, unless you were well away from habitation, people would raise objections. Now, we were one of the first airfields when the resource consent came in, and we didn't have any problems at all, except several people did object to the fact that we were going to operate noisy aircraft. Well, we weren't.
Vern Grant is our current chief flying instructor. He's a BCAT instructor. He's also a secondary school teacher based at Kirinuri College here in the South Wairarapa, like in Greytown.
We come down to the club every weekend that we can in terms of flying weather, and if we're not here flying, we'll be doing some maintenance work on the grounds or on the actual aeroplanes. I started flying in 1991. It's a real passion of mine. The different shades of the sky and of the ground, the peace that it brings, the perspective and the dimension of flying are all quite unique, and you actually have to experience it to know precisely what I'm talking about. When a person shows an interest in flying, we take them for 3 flights initially. First of all, there's an orientation flight, just to show them that the glider is perfectly safe and that it will do precisely what we want it to. On the second flight, we will get the student perhaps to have a hands-on approach for a minute or so of straight line flying in the sky, so that they can see that there's actually not much involved in flying a glider in a straight line. Third flight, we might do some mild aerobatics, just to again reinforce the fact that the aircraft is incredibly robustly built, and they're in a very safe sport.
One of his duties as an instructor is to teach students the principles of flight.
Okay, Laura, we have here a glider. It's actually a giant bird without an engine. And so we need to look at the laws of physics to understand how it can actually stay up in the air and move through the air. Okay, so if you look at the wing profile, the top of the wing has got a bigger curvature to it than the bottom. When air is forced to move faster over a plane, or a flat surface in other words, the air pressure is decreased. So what you have is a differential in air pressure. You've got high pressure underneath, or higher, relatively higher, and lower pressure on top. Now that's actually going to then force the wing up. So in terms of flying in the air, 3 main control surfaces, and we have access to all of these through the control column here and the rudder pedals. If you can imagine a giant skewer stuck straight through the aircraft going that way there, the aircraft is then able to rotate on that giant skewer, and that's called roll. And the ailerons do that. If you watch out to the end of the wing there, that's what the ailerons do to achieve roll. The second axis is called the lateral axis, and that's like that giant skewer going right through from wingtip to wingtip. And this time the pitch control will activate that, and that's moving the control column forward and backward like that, and the plane is actually pitching up and down. And the third control sequence is using the rudders through what's called the normal or vertical axis, and that's like that giant skewer stuck straight through where the pilot sits at the back there. And that will turn the plane like a steering wheel does in a car. In the air, we use all three at the same time to effect a movement.
Well, I started gliding when my father brought me up here just for a day trip, just to see what was going on around gliding Wairarapa, and I went for a trial flight. I got a bit hooked and decided, yeah, I'm going to learn to fly. I've learned level flight, equal balanced turning, thermal soaring, how to recover from stalls and spins, the first stages of spins. Groundwork, how to run a day of flying, how to do ground control and radio work and whatnot. When I go solo, I'm hoping that it will be a very uneventful and quite an easy flight, and hopefully that won't be too far away.
Righto, Laura, we've had a good flight. We've been away for about 10 minutes. When you fishtailed on the takeoff there, that wasn't in fact you. That was the effect of the wind coming through past the hangar there. Don't be too keen to overcorrect it, because what happens is you go into an oscillation and you end up overcorrecting all the way up the line. Top of the launch, excellent. Great release, very smooth. I didn't even hear the hook come off, so that was fantastic. You are a lot less aggressive now with your thermaling technique. You're a lot smoother in the turns with nice angles of bank. That will enable you to establish where the thermal actually is a lot better than being really aggressive and really ronking right over and doing about a 60-degree turn.
I've been a club member here at Papua for about 2 years, flying in the twin aircraft through to a solo position. Currently flying the K7 and K13, and they're the twin aircraft, and wanting to move on to the K6, which is a solo aircraft. I've done a year before coming here at Paraparam, and that's a little bit different style of flying, more modern gliders, towed by aircraft, so it's a little bit slower, not quite as aggressive to get off the ground. Where under a winch, it's very much like a rocket ship. You know, you've got something like 2,200 feet that happen in a minute, where you're on tow for maybe 2,500 feet for 5 minutes. Paraparam works very well in a westerly, but doesn't work so well in a southerly or in a northerly so much. Because of the valley that's here, you typically trap a lot more heat, and there's a bit more thermal flying to be done. Where at Paraparam you're looking for more ridge or wave type flying. So from my limited experience, it seems to be there's more thermal flying here, and that's quite an important skill to learn in flying. I hadn't flown for 6 months. I normally ski the winters and fly in the summer. So 6 months had gone by and I hadn't really done much flying, so my landing was quite rough, and just that whole it's a bit like getting used to a car, you know, the meshing of the clutch. You know, it takes you a few drives before you get it right, and just applying the brake at the right time and getting a nice landing. So we have to go through that every now and again, and it's important to get it right.
I took a break from gliding, a number of years from gliding, and I fronted up towards the end of 2008. I did some check flights with Vern Grant. I said to him, I want to just work out how much I can still remember. We went up, and he says, Selwyn, he says, you haven't lost it. If you wish, go and do it yourself. Well, I haven't stopped. No one's told me to stop. I've just kept going. I said to him right from the start, I said, these are two goals I have. I want to get my passenger rating, and I said I also want to do my instructor C rating. I've got my passenger rating, and now I'm proceeding to work through my instructor C rating. It's not given to us. I went on a 3-day instructor's course up in Matamata. What the emphasis was on was actually teaching, the teaching side of it. Quite a number of us, including myself, are still coming to terms with that. And it's gradually working into that process to be able to fly and teach at the same time. Fortunately, the people up in Matamata were very patient. They went through the whiteboard explaining just how to get the message across, even to using just a little toy glider. I'm not a competitive person by nature. What I really do like doing is sharing the experience with other people, whether it's on the ground, the groundwork, or whether it's in the air. What I like to do is cross-country work and aerobatics. I've been shown some basic aerobatic manoeuvres and thoroughly enjoying it. Good fun, it's really invigorating, and I would like to just move on to that, not in a competition way, just do something different. Well, I've been shown chandelles, or in other words, wingovers. Having done my checks, I proceed to push the nose of the glider down, climb the speed up to about 65 to 70 knots, and then gently pull the glider up to vertical at the same time, going into a hard left rudder. I roll the aircraft over to the left, and then once I'm pointing at the ground, then of course I just gently pull back the stick and go back into level flight.
I think we had about 30 members when the club came together. That may have risen up to 35. Once the club or the gliding members decided that they wanted to do something, it just grew like a mushroom.
Somehow I had an interest in flying, probably due to my father. It was actually my parents that first told me about the Walsh Scout Flying School. I was in the Scouts at the time, and this was the very first one. In fact, it was experimental. It was up at Matamata. I was 17 at the time. I went solo, had a ball. What I do remember is the expertise of the instructors there. At least 3 of them had been ex-World War II pilots, one of them on bombing raids, another was flying Mosquitoes on low-level operations over Europe. I remember first solo, as they say, everyone does. So yes, I've been fortunate. I've actually been back to several of the other flying schools, but nothing is the same as your first school. I sort of came away with that with a buzz for months. I had been to a couple of Scout gliding schools, which I like the laid-back atmosphere. You could still do a lot of things in gliders. In fact, some ways you could do more. I started gliding at Paraparam. At the time, we thought that Paraparam was going to go to Worms. So the club gave me an assignment to actually go around and look at other sites. And somehow I heard about this. I came over here. Jim had just literally shifted the fences the morning I came over. I don't know who decided to build a hangar. We must have been very far-sighted, because as a club, of course, we didn't have any money. The thing I remember about the hangar is several things. I remember the posts. One of our older members actually had a chainsaw in his hand and cut them about 1 metre shorter than they should have been, which consequently has meant that our hangar roof has been 1 metre lower. We've cursed him over the years. The other thing was the floor was quite a major effort. Previously we waltzed the gliders in by pushing them forward, back, forward, back. The floor was metal. It was almost impossible to push a glider on it. So somebody got some 44-gallon drums for road tar, lit a fire, we put the drums over it, melted the tar, we filled up a metal bucket of hot tar, rushed in, spread it out, rushed out before we actually expired, and our lungs full up with tar, and we finished the whole floor like this. Interesting enough, it's actually proved a very durable floor. 15 years later, still works. The trusses had to be built twice. The first time they were built, they went up to standard. The hangar has proved to be such an asset over the years, and we went from being a club that wasn't even an airstrip to a club with a hangar and a house within about 2 years. So we had a very rapid rise.
The members realised when they set the club up that it wouldn't be possible to run an aircraft with a small club. The cost would have collapsed the club. The winch has proved itself, but needs a fairly long runway so that you can get a reasonable height. Now, if you're launching into a breeze, you can get an effective height of about half the total length of the launch. So we were getting up to 2,500 feet in height with a 20-knot wind from a 5,000-foot runway. But if you're launching into strong winds, there's less chance of capturing thermals. So a long section of strip, you get about 1/3 of that in a windless day. But then you've got the chance of picking up thermals. Currently we can take the winch out to 7,500 feet. And that, even in moderately windy conditions, lets us get about 3,500 foot. But it certainly makes it easier if we can get launches up to 3,000, even to 4,000. That enables us to range further and find lift or thermal activity. And it makes training easier. And now we're in the process of extending the runways out to about 9,000 feet. And there's also a runway to the west, so we can accommodate the prevailing winds and get some really high launches. This is a pretty good site. In fact, I think it's one of the best in the country because we're on the eastern side of the main range. It's got a microclimate of its own to a large extent. There's a useful ridge if you want to go ridge flying, but there's very little other air traffic through here. And with that I hear an aircraft approaching. But, we've upgraded aircraft, we've altered the winch.
The high launches that we were looking for, especially with the heavier gliders and the launch speeds, we needed something that was a bit more robust. I got involved on the engineering side with a group of others to build a winch for ourselves, a 2-drum winch, and that worked out very well at the time, but we've been subsequently been modified and changed, and it's now a single drum winch with a pay-on gear. We were using a steel wire at the beginning.
We've put on synthetic cable now that's very strong but lightweight. That's giving us higher launches and a safer method of operation. Well, this is the winch driver's position, and it can be one of the loneliest jobs on the gliding strip. We are in radio contact with the glider. This is the throttle, and up here is the load cell display, and that enables the winch driver to monitor the loads that are actually on the glider.
Winch launching is really quite something. 1 minute you're level wings there standing still, and then next minute 30 feet down the field you're actually flying. That really is a wow factor for a person who hasn't been in a glider before. A colleague of mine likened it to being in a drag car without the sound. He said it just throws you straight back in the seat and you're away. Once we've given the all out command to the winch driver, all out, the glider proceeds at a fairly rapid rate from 0 in 3 seconds, and you're actually in full climb mode.
50, 60, 60.
By that time, up to 45, 50 knots, and then rotate the glider into a 30-degree climb until we get to about 200 feet or so, and then we're into a full 45-degree climb. With myself, the whole process in my mind has slowed down, but the person that's the passenger, it's just mind-blowing. I think, wow.
50. 52, 52. Thank you, Jim. That was 1,700 feet.
We've got more aircraft, and we've got more aircraft that we need to get into the air so that our solo pilots have got something to run. There's about 9 here at the moment. I own some of them, the club owns a number of them, and we'll put those in the air when the need arises. Now, a lot of the aircraft are old, but they've still got a lot of life in them, and that enables us to operate at a pretty reasonable rate. It would be very nice to own the latest composite aircraft, but you're looking at a tremendous cost to do all that.
My first flight was in Paraprem. I went for a trial flight many years ago, and sometime after that I came up here in 1991 and started flying from here. Not a lot over that period of time. About 140 hours. In this sport there's a lot of times when you can't fly, and took a year or two off here and there. I just love the challenge of gliding and friendliness of the club members, the challenge to stay in the air for as long as possible, just the experience of flying. I've loved being involved in aviation practically all my life. The glider stays in the air with forward momentum or rising warm air, thermals, or in this strip the westerly wind is deflected off that ridge over there, and we can soar in the rising air that is going over that ridge. The longest flight I've had is from this strip in a single seater, which I've got a half share in, 5 hours and 18 minutes. Most of that flight was in thermals around the Wairarapa, and the last hour or so I was just, when the thermals later in the day, it turned westerly, and I was managing to stay up on that ridge in ridge lift. I haven't done long distances. I've flown from here up to Masterton, across the ranges and down to Featherston and across to Martinborough, just around the local towns. Oh, and Carterton, I've flown over Carterton quite a number of times too. When you're at a certain height, you can calculate what height you're going to lose in order to get back to the airstrip. So you make sure you've got the height to return to your home base. On one occasion I didn't. I landed out in the paddock, but that was okay. It was just south of here, and it was a very smooth paddock actually. You get an indication early with the right weather conditions when you get plenty of lift. I think that long flight I did, I got up to about 6,000 feet from a launch of about 1,600 off the winch. So most of the time I was between 4,000 and 6,000 feet. Later in the flight above the ridge, I got down to about 1,200 feet above ground level.
I've belonged to the club for about 10 years since I retired. I'm a survivor of the Blitz. I used to live in near Croydon during the war. We used to be right under the flight path of all the bombers and the fighter aircraft that went over. I actually stood and watched them during the air raids, and I wondered how you could make those machines do all those wonderful things, how you could control them, tell them what to do, how on earth you could make them move like that. I had to get employment, of course, so I forgot all about that. But when I retired, I thought, well, I'm going to bloody well find out. I did. I joined the club. I became the secretary, and then the secretary-treasurer, and then the treasurer. But I've done all the other jobs that people don't think about, like handling aircraft, driving tractors, managing ropes, tying them up and untying them, and all the other 101 jobs. We're not a commercial club. We're in it for the pleasure. We're in it because we want to teach people how to fly. We've got our Kuriri College kids, and they've been lovely. We get all sorts of people coming along. Just about everybody you can think of coming through the club. Probably one of the most rewarding aspects, all the different people you meet, all the different reactions to flying, from fear to, oh, that was just wonderful, they say. It really makes your day when someone says that they've really enjoyed themselves. My own flying, well, I'm getting older and my reactions aren't as good as they should be, so my flying is hasn't progressed as fast as other people's. In fact, it's taken several years. I'm still not solo, but one day, I'll gather up my courage and I'll say to Vern, I want to go.
There was an occasion just recently where there were two women that wanted to go for a flight.
I've been up in a glider probably 9 or 10 times, I suppose now, in different places. Most of it I've done actually here in Greytown. I started flying in Gisborne on the east coast, and I started flying because they had a week of things that women could do. You could go and race a racing car, go and parachute jump, go and do whatever you wanted to do. It's just an opportunity to try something you'd never ever tried before, and I'd always wanted to try flying. So I went and did a trial flight, and got hooked, but it carried on from
All out,
there
all out.
and went through, gained my private pilot's licence, joined up with associations like the Airwomen's Association for fellowship and that sort of thing, and my career now is also heavily involved in aviation. Using the winch, it's quite a spectacular takeoff, and I wasn't quite prepared for that, I suppose, at first, and it is quite thrilling. From fixed wing flying, where you take off quite slowly and gradually build up speed to take off, to suddenly being launched in the air very quickly and pretty close to 45 degrees, it's quite spectacular, and it gets you up there pretty quickly, good height, and away you go. The thing that I love about flying and that appeals to me most is just that freedom, being up in the air. I forget sometimes when you take someone up who's never been flying or never been in a small aircraft before, it's a completely different perspective of the world, and there's a lot of freedom up there. You can go a lot of places and see a lot. I mean, I've seen some fantastic parts of the country that people never get to see because the roads don't go anywhere near it. I've met some pretty fantastic people too who have that same passion and just enjoy the flying and the freedom that flying brings to you. There are not a lot of women involved in aviation. Several years ago I looked at the statistics when I worked at civil aviation, and women were still less than 5% of all licences that have been issued. That number, I believe, today hasn't really changed a lot. I'm not quite sure why it's not seen as a career choice. Different associations, we've been trying to encourage women to go into it and take it up, whether it's perceived as being too hard a career or whether it's still perceived as being male dominated, which is sad. And there's a lot of women have already blazed those trails really and broken down a lot of those barriers. The attitudes have changed over time, and as long as you can do the job and do it the same, then you should have exactly the same opportunities, and the world's your oyster, and it's a great career to get into. There's a lot to learn in doing it, but there's nothing that's a gender issue that actually prevents you from flying. I think the main thing that prevents people from flying really is attitude. Attitude and that passion for doing something, no matter what it is the most important thing, and if you've got that, then you'll strive harder to achieve those goals.
Well, today's my birthday. I've always wanted to fly like a bird, sort of like an albatross or a gull, and sort of swoopy thing. A glider would be a next best thing. I've never been in a glider before, and what's going through my mind is I just previously saw the previous person go up, and there's this winch thing which just looks like it's extremely speedy up, and that's a little frightening, but then I saw what it was like when it was up in the air. It looked absolutely amazing. It was absolutely fantastic. I loved it. The takeoff that I was concerned about was just quick and mind-blowing. It was mind-blowing. It was fast, over within a few seconds. I don't think we were gone very long, but it was just beautiful, and I immediately wanted to do it again. It was better than what I expected. It was more, of course the visuals are huge, so everything from the air looks so much more patterned and detailed. But you're used to seeing that out of an aeroplane, but with a glider, it's so small and such a lot of visibility. It was fantastic.
All out, all out.
Out or out.
the future lies with teaching young people to fly. And that's not just to keep the club operating, that's putting something back into the community.
Okay, today's mini lecture is looking at safe speed near the ground. Now the formula is the stall speed of the aircraft plus 10 knots plus half the wind velocity, and that's the tricky part, isn't it? How do you read the wind speed? When the windsock is standing straight out, it's engineered to be about roughly 20 knots of wind, right? And so if it's sort of dangling down at 45 degrees, it's roughly 15 knots. If it's, you know, down a bit more, 20 odd degrees, it's about 10 knots. 15 at the moment, so we'll make it 8. Now, what's my safe speed near the ground?
50.
Yeah. And what do we constantly tell you to come in when you're landing at?
50 knots.
50 knots. Yeah. Okay, look, when you're driving a car or a motorbike, what are the 2 directions you can go in? Forward and left and right, okay? And in the aircraft, you've got 3 directions of movement, okay? Now, they're based on the plane of the aircraft. The plane is just a word for the direction of the aircraft as it's sitting. When you're pushing forward, what's happening to the speed of the aircraft? Okay, that's called a secondary effect. What are you doing when you pull the stick back? Okay.
Now, the cost of getting a pilot's license today with a powered aircraft is pretty limiting. But using a winch to launch a glider, people can get into the air and learn to fly a glider, and then they've got the chance to take that further if they want to go to power flying, and then there's the chance of getting into aviation as a career. We've put an education trust together, and that's starting to operate, and that's working in conjunction with the gliding club. Now, that education trust can hold property in trust, so we're making it possible for the trust to hold the land and operate it as an airfield as long as the need is there. If flying operations cease for whatever reason, then the land will come back to the family. But in the interim, while it's still used as an airfield, it'll be continued to be farmed in the manner that we're doing it now.
From time to time I get the opportunity to take people up flying, and there are occasions to take trial flights or passenger flights. Every time I go flying, I need to make a decision. Am I going to stay within gliding distance of my airfield, or am I going to go beyond? If I'm going to go beyond gliding distance, then I need to consider rising air within the area that I want to go into, so I can gain height and go further afield. If the lift has dropped out, then I just need to land in some unsuspecting farmer's paddock. As a general rule of thumb, if you stay upwind of your field, well then you've got every chance of getting back home. Over the years I've spent some time, a lot of time, training and concentrating on getting things right. And fortunately, I've had some very good instructors who've been very patient with my progress and my flying, and now I feel it's time for me to give something back. So, look, you can spend the rest of your life just walking around on Earth, or you can come flying and go where eagles dare to soar.